Well, good evening, everybody. Hope you are having a good week. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Nate Eaton. I am a reporter with EastIdahoNews.com, and this is Courtroom Insider. Every week, we are taking a look at a case, things that are happening in courtrooms or things that have happened in the courtrooms in the past. And my goodness, I'm glad you're here tonight. We have John Ramsey, JonBenét Ramsey's father here. I conducted an interview with him a short while ago, and he is talking about it all. You know, a lot of people think that he killed his daughter or that a family member killed his daughter back in 1996. It's been that long. And we talked about that. He addressed that head on, the people that think that his family was involved, and also why he believes that now is the closest he may get to finding his daughter's killer, and how he actually has hope. He's in his 80s now, but he has hope that the case may be solved. So we'll get to that in just a minute. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Post it in the comments below. We go through and read all that. What we should do is put a big map on the wall and map where you're all from. It would be cool to see where everybody's watching. I want to give a short update on, Vallow, Daybell. Judge is denying all of her motions. So what that means is that as of today, the trial is set to begin in about a month. Jury selection will begin March 31st. I'm headed down a few days before. I will be in Arizona for the entire trial. We'll be doing Courtroom Insider every single night, like we did with the other two trials. You can watch every night. We'll do a recap of what happened in court. Thus far, the judge has allowed cameras in court proceedings, but he has not allowed live. And we're still working as the media. We're still waiting for the judge to rule on the camera situation. The prosecution is requesting that cameras are okay, but asking that there is a 30-minute delay on broadcasting of the footage in case a juror is shown or something goes wrong. We're waiting for the judge to respond to that. If that happens, we'll still have the video for you. Regardless if a camera's allowed in, we'll get the video to you. It might not just be live. It might just be, a few hours later or whatever, 30-minute delay, whatever we need. So that's coming up. Jury selection begins July 31st, excuse me. And then, not July 31st, March 31st, and then the trial will begin shortly thereafter. It's been some interesting developments in the Kohberger case over the past week or so. His defense, it appears, plans to file a motion asking that death penalty be removed from the table because their client is on the autism spectrum. Interesting turn there. The defense team for Brian Kohberger, this is from the Spokesman Review. Alexandra Dugan does great work. She covered the Lori Vallow trial. A motion to strike the death penalty, re the autism spectrum disorder, was filed Monday by Kohberger's defense team. He's charged, of course, with 4 counts of first-degree murder. And the motion was not publicly available, but it will likely become available in the coming days. And because it's sealed, we don't know much more than that. We don't know if Kohberger's been diagnosed with autism. We don't know if they want to get him diagnosed or tested for autism. We don't know if they're hoping that maybe they believe he does have autism, so it might get this off the table. We don't know. But it'll be an interesting development if that becomes kind of a key part of the defense, or at least they're using it now as part of their defense for the removal of the death penalty. We'll see what happens there. All of the other motions that the that the defense filed that we've talked about here over the coming weeks has been denied. So the DNA from the knife sheath, that's being admitted. The other things, basically, that it's been a win, you could say, for the prosecution as far as what can be admitted. So we'll keep an eye on that. We have some really exciting weeks coming up in the next few weeks here on Courtroom Insider. Marcia Clark, the OJ prosecutor, has written a new book. I've been chatting with her, and we're going to have her on. We're going to bring her here onto Courtroom Insider. If you have any questions you want me to ask her, let me know. And we'll have that here in the next few weeks, and some other programming I can't quite talk about yet, but you will know in a few days. I'll say that. I'm sorry. I hate to tease you, but I'm not authorized to speak. Just be sure you tune in next week, next Thursday, unless there's major breaking news. Next Thursday should be a really good Courtroom Insider. And next week will be a busy week for news. I'll say that. Or later on in the week. Okay, I'll stop talking now about that. JonBenét Ramsey. Do you remember where you were when you heard about JonBenét Ramsey and that she was dead and that it was awful, the circumstances, that it was horrific? JonBenét was an American child beauty queen killed at the age of 6 in her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. It was actually Christmas night, December 25th. Her body was found in the basement 7 hours after she had been reported missing. She had sustained a fractured skull. The autopsy report suggested she died of asphyxiation by strangulation, and her death was ruled a homicide. There was something around her neck as well. Of course, it was an instant story. All news from all over the world was covering this tragedy. And part of the interest, I think, was because, well, I know, because JonBenét had been in beauty pageants at a young age. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, who has since died, entered her into these beauty contests. The Boulder police initially suspected that a long handwritten ransom note reportedly found at the home was written by Patsy, and that the note and the appearance of JonBenét's body had been staged by Patsy and her husband, John, to cover up the killing. Remember that in the beginning? Everybody was focused on the family. I don't want to say for good reason, but in a lot of these cases, the family members are the key suspects. You look at the family first. That's what they did here. 3 years later, in 1999, the police and district attorney said that JonBenét's brother Burke, who was 9 at the time of his death, at the time of her death, was not a suspect. JonBenét's parents gave several interviews but resisted police questioning except on their own terms. In 2013, unsealed court documents revealed that a 1999 grand jury recommended filing charges against the Ramseys for permitting the child to be in a threatening situation. John and Patsy were also accused of hindering the prosecution of an unidentified person who had committed the crime of first-degree murder and child abuse. However, the DA determined there was insufficient evidence to pursue a successful indictment. They were never charged. John was never charged. Patsy, Burke, they were never charged. Burke broke his silence years ago on Dr. Phil, and I don't think he's spoken to anybody else. He's now a young man. In 2002, a new DA took over the investigation. So this is 12 years after JonBenét was killed. No, more than that. This was like 15 years. And the theory that an intruder entered the home became the working theory, you could say. Then the next year in 2003, trace DNA taken from her clothing found to belong to an unknown male. Each family member's DNA had been excluded from this match. They found DNA from a man unknown to the family, or at least an unknown male's DNA, on JonBenét's clothing. The DA sent the Ramseys a letter of apology in 2008, declaring the family was, quote, completely cleared by the DNA results. 10 years ago, 2015, former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner said in his view, the perpetrator was the source of that DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. In 2009, the Boulder police took the case back from the DA and reopened the investigation. So, police departments investigate, they hand the case over to the prosecutor, the DA's office, who decides if there's sufficient for charges. If the DA does not investigate, they can hold on to the case, or does not charge, they can hold on to the case, or in this case, the police department took it back in 2009. National and international media coverage of the case focused on JonBenét's brief beauty pageant career, as well as her parents' wealth and the unusual evidence found in the case, particularly suggestions of sexual abuse. Media reports questioned how the police handled the investigation, and there were accusations against various members of the Ramsey family, including John, who will be here in just a minute. Ramsey family members and friends have filed defamation suits against several media organizations. The crime is still considered a cold case and an open investigation, with the Boulder Police Department giving updates on their website. There is now a new police chief in the city of Boulder. And just recently, he posted this video.
I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Boulder Police Department to give an update on the investigation into the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. As many of you know, this horrible crime happened in December of 1996, and our officers responded to investigate. While I was not at Boulder Police 28 years ago, I have worked in policing for more than 20 years, and I want to assure you that our agency is committed to doing everything we can to bring justice to JonBenét and hold her killer responsible. So much of how law enforcement works has changed in the last 30 years. There are a number of things that people have pointed to throughout the years that could have been done better, and we acknowledge that is true. However, it is important to emphasize that while we cannot go back to that horrible day in 1996, our goal is to find JonBenét Ramsey's killer. Our commitment to that has never wavered. For years, our detectives have partnered with multiple agencies across the country, including our federal and state partners, like the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, as well as several outside forensic labs and DNA experts, to evaluate the latest advancements in technology, viable tips, and investigative leads. Our collaboration also includes the Colorado Cold Case Review Team, which is a panel of outside experts brought together in December of 2023 to review this case, generate additional investigative recommendations, and determine if updated technologies and or forensic testing might produce new intelligence or leads to solve this case. That review took a year to prepare for and included an intensive effort to digitize all evidence to create a comprehensive and searchable database containing thousands of information files. Those files include more than 21,000 tips, over 1,000 interviews, which were conducted across 17 states and 2 foreign countries, samples from more than 200 different individuals, including handwriting, DNA, fingerprints, and shoe prints, nearly 2,500 pieces of evidence, and roughly 40,000 reports, with more than 1 million pages documenting the investigation. A fresh inventory of all collected evidence was made available for investigative review, which would not have been possible without the assistance of the FBI. The Cold Case Review Panel gave us a lengthy list of recommendations, which we are continuing to work through and evaluate. And though that review may have ended, our collaboration with those entities continues to this day. I know that our community would like to know more information and specifics on our progress, but like any major criminal investigation, there is no way that we can share that information publicly without compromising the integrity of this case and any future prosecution by the District Attorney's Office. What I can tell you, though, is that we have thoroughly investigated multiple people identified as suspects throughout the years, and we continue to be open-minded about what occurred as we investigate the tips that come in to detectives. I can also tell you that detectives are regularly investigating some aspects of this terrible crime, and I receive updates frequently. We are hopeful that the renewed public attention will generate more tips, and we encourage anyone who has any information to contact our detectives at the following email: bouldersmostwanted@bouldercolorado.gov. In the interest of transparency, I also think it's important for the community to know that our department has had ongoing conversations with JonBenét's family, the last of which occurred in mid-2024, and we are committed to continued open dialogue. JonBenét would have been 34 years old this year. She deserved to grow up and live her life to the fullest. Instead, it was brutally taken from her. Of course, those who loved and knew JonBenét continue to grieve. This crime also haunts the Boulder community, especially every officer and detective who's ever been a part of this investigation. Every single one of them thinks about her and would love nothing more than to bring justice to her memory. I know the Boulder Police Department has not talked a lot about this investigation publicly, but that's, again, because no one wants to jeopardize any potential prosecution of a suspect. We must constantly balance the release of any information in an active and open investigation with the public's right and desire to know what's going on. To the extent that news coverage, documentaries, and miniseries keep JonBenét's memory alive and could perhaps spark new information, we welcome any coverage that might allow us to finally bring the killer or killers to justice. At the end of the day, we must not forget that regardless of everything that has or has not transpired since 1996, a 6-year-old girl is dead, and we will continue to do everything in our power, along with our partners, to solve this case. Ideally, we would be able to go back and prevent this awful crime from happening, but sadly we cannot. However, moving forward, we're committed to investigating every tip and lead that comes our way. I beg anyone that has information that has not been previously shared with us to contact us, and that includes those responsible for this crime. Please help us in our efforts to secure justice for JonBenét.
So that is video from the new police chief. Now, John tells me he is hopeful. He is hopeful that this police chief will take steps that have not been taken in the past, such as getting that DNA tested further to find out who killed his daughter. And now, here is my conversation with John Ramsey. John, thank you for chatting with me. There have been some new developments as of late concerning your daughter's case. What can you tell us about the Boulder police chief?
Well, we met with the relatively new chief. Again, we've met with him before, but we did meet again a couple weeks ago with his staff. And, I'm generally encouraged because they've kind of cleaned house. I mean, the Boulder Police Department was not good. It was a mess in terms of personnel. And that was what caused our case to go nowhere. And they finally got that fixed. They brought in a new police chief. Citizens Review Board recommended 5 of their detectives be terminated. They dealt with that, one of which was the fellow that had our case for 28 years and really was not of any, in fact, he was more of an obstacle than a value. So anyway, there was structural things fixed that needed to be fixed before anything would happen in our case. So we met. My motive in meeting was to strongly encourage them to use the latest DNA technology that's now available and has been so successfully used solving old cold cases the last couple of years. And we did have a representative from a DNA lab with us to be sure that we articulated what could be done well. And so we accomplished that. And it was generally a good meeting. I'm encouraged. I do worry that, small town police department is resource limited. And this is going to take some work. So
and likely some money to do the testing. Did you get the promise that it's going to happen?
No, we did not get a promise. They were very coy about what they intended to do. They listened, but didn't really commit to anything.
You're right in the fact that, technology the past few years with genetic genealogy has solved a lot of crimes all over. Do you think that if that is tested, that might solve and find who killed your daughter?
I think, yes, I do. Lou Smith, who was the detective that worked on this case that was brought in by the DA out of retirement, told me before he died that this case will be solved by DNA, period. And he died about 14 years ago. He's a great man, great detective, legendary detective. So I think he's right. And he certainly couldn't have foreseen the advancements in DNA technology that's happened, but it has happened. And I'm convinced that if it's employed, there's a good chance that we'll get a solution.
It makes you wonder, had the technology been around nearly 30 years ago, which, by the way, it's crazy to believe it's been 30 years,
I know.
if this would have been solved back then.
Well, yes and no. The problem that what we were dealing with back then was a very poorly led police department, frankly, some misfits, very arrogant, no experience, so-called detectives, and they immediately jumped to the conclusion that it's the parents, because it's always the parents. and they were in the home, and this is going to be easy to solve this case. We'll just figure out which parent it was. And that was before any evidence came in, before any background information, nothing. That boom, that was the decision. Let's go with it. And literally, that's what they did. And then DNA was recovered, and the results given to the police in early January of '97 that, okay, hey, we have unidentified male DNA on JonBenét's clothing that shouldn't be there, and doesn't match the family. And that was a real problem for the police because they had to explain that away to proceed with their persecution, let's call it, not a prosecution. They kept that a secret for 6 months, from the DA, from the media,
And from you.
and from us. We didn't know that. So we had DNA, within weeks, unidentified male DNA, within weeks of JonBenét's murder. And the police basically tried to explain it away, because that conflicted with their conclusion. And so anyway, we had DNA back then. The difference is now is the DNA sample, I'm sure you know this, the DNA sample that was taken back then was to be compatible with the federal database, CODIS. It has to have a certain number of markers, which ours did, and it went into CODIS. That's just a database of really bad guys. And not all the bad guys are in that database. To do the genealogy research testing, it has to be in a different format. And whereas DNA CODIS sample we have has 9 markers, I think. The I think it's called SNP format that's needed for genealogy research has over 1 million data points. And so it has to be retested to get it in that format so that then we can use the public genealogy databases to do research. So it has to be retested.
I would imagine that some company out there has reached out to you, some genetic, testing, DNA testing, and said, let us do it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. They'd love to get involved. The police have to invite them.
They do.
They have to ask them. And that's a real fundamental flaw with how we're organized as a country and our justice and policing. We have 18,000 police jurisdictions. Each one's kind of independently operated and owned. And if they don't want help cannot come in.
Right. So didn't you receive a letter of apology from the police, or the DA at least there in Boulder?
Yeah, the DA took the case away from the police back in, I don't know, 2001 maybe, and assembled an investigative team, and then did some additional testing of crime scene samples, got additional unidentified male DNA that was consistent with the original sample back in '97. And that gave her enough confidence to say, no, this is the killer's DNA. She exonerated our family, said you're no longer suspects. You'll be treated as victims. And I apologize for the way you were treated by the police. So that was in 2008, I think.
Did that do anything for you, having that?
Well, it was like, okay, we got that out of the way. Now let's find the killer. And we met with her staff, her investigative team at that time. And, it wasn't a celebration. We were grateful that she moved the case forward. That was a huge step forward to say, okay, police department, forget about the Ramsey family. I know you want to prosecute them, but the evidence doesn't support that. Let's now go find the killer. And so she really took that step ahead, which it was how we looked at it. It's like, thankfully, now let's get going.
Right.
We told the police early on, we were told, okay, they always look at the parents. You were there. You've got to be looked at. And we said, okay, we understand that, but don't stop there. But of course they did stop there because that was their decision on day one, and we're never varied from it. So it was a big step forward to say, okay, let's focus on the DNA and get going. Sadly, well, regretfully, she was term limited, and the new DA gave the case right back to the police, which put it back into nowhere zone.
That's got to be frustrating to the politics of it all. As you were saying, the boundaries around the police departments, there's thousands of jurisdictions I mean, how do you deal with that when you're dealing with the murder of your daughter?
It's very, very frustrating and disappointing. Uh, there's lots of help that was offered, qualified help that could have made a difference early on, within days, and it was refused. And that was what I've always criticized the police for. Not that they didn't know what they're doing, they didn't have experience. The detective working on our case was a auto theft investigator. He's now in charge of the murder of a child. You know, he has zero experience and lots of arrogance, but no experience. Uh, but the fact that help was refused was just absolutely foolish. I look at this Moscow, Idaho case that where three students were murdered,
Four
and
students.
four, was it four? Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
that's
yeah.
horrible. Uh, First thing I looked at, how big is Moscow, Idaho? Never heard of it. 30,000 people. Oh boy, they don't have a big police department. If they got big egos and arrogance like we had, then this case is doomed. Police chief got up and said, "I'm going to manage this case." Oh, that's scary. But he did manage it. He didn't. He got help from everybody he could get his hands on. He had 40 FBI agents on site. He had the state police. He managed the case. He brought in resources. Within 3 weeks, they had an arrest. That's what should have happened in our case, and could have, because it was
And
off.
and that arrest came from genetic DNA, genetic genealogy DNA.
Sir, it was.
Yeah,
And that's what we're asking the police to do now, 28 years later.
right. So,
And
John, despite all of this, there are still people that think you were involved in your daughter's death.
there's still people that think the moon landing was fake and that the Earth is flat. I mean, there's always going to be that crowd. We can't worry about it or uh, convince them otherwise. And I'm not concerned about convincing them otherwise. I want an answer to this now for the sake of my children, my grandchildren. This cloud over our family's reputation needs to be cleared up as best possible. It'll never be cleared up 100%. There's always going to be people that think, well, I know the family did it. I could tell by looking at him. That's humanity. Once your reputation's damaged, rightly or wrongly, it can't be back to pure white. It never will.
And,
That's life.
yeah, and you would even have a portion of the public who, if they came out today and named a suspect who confessed, people still might say, well, John was still involved.
That's right. No, it's just the way life is. So you can't dwell on that. Yeah, the Bible talks about that in the book of Proverbs. They call them fools. They say keep fools out of your life. You can't deal with them. You can't convince them with facts. Keep them out of your life. Don't worry about them.
Okay, you are almost 30 years later able to say that, but I'm sure in the beginning, when you and your wife are being called suspects and dealing with the grief of this horrific crime, how did you handle it then? I'm sure it irritated you then.
Well, Patsy said it best. She said, look, I was hurt as deeply as I can be hurt by the loss of my daughter. This other stuff doesn't matter, doesn't hurt. It did, and it didn't. We were so destroyed emotionally. It didn't matter. It was just noise level stuff.
Have
Yeah.
there been any suspects or close to suspects, persons of interest, other than you and your family members that have been named over the years?
Well, we got a lot of leads. We hired our own detectives, investigators, because we knew the police were not capable. And we'd get calls all the time from people. I tried to call the police. They wouldn't return my call. I've got information. Even the DA, Boulder DA, called our detectives, said, look, I've got a very interesting lead here. I don't think the police will follow up on it. Could you have your detectives follow up on it? And we did. And it was a pretty interesting lead. And in fact, when I was given the information by our detectives, I said, "That's the guy." And they said, "Well, slow down. Don't do a Boulder Police on us. We don't know that yet. It looks pretty interesting, but we don't know that." I said, "Yeah, you're right." I could give you 4 or 5 examples of people that came to our attention that circumstantially you say, "Holy mackerel, that needs to be looked at hard."
Hmm.
Um, the interesting thing about these genealogy cases, using genealogy research, that cases that have been solved, old cold cases, the killer ultimately has come out of left field. He wasn't on anybody's radar. Nobody had him listed as a suspect. Golden State Killer was the first use of that technology. 40-year-old case. Guy was an ex-cop. He wasn't on anybody's radar, yet he turned out to be a serial killer, identified using this approach. So I don't, we can look at these circumstantial cases, and we looked at them, but I really go back to the John Douglas, who's probably the premier crime profiler for the FBI, set up that whole program years ago. We spent quite a bit of time with him, and he developed a profile of the killer, and I think it's pretty accurate.
Okay, so back to the guy you were saying you went to your detectives and you're like, "That's the guy." Did anything come of that?
Well, he's the no, it didn't. I mean, as a private detective, you can only go so far.
Right. Did he hand that over to law enforcement? Did they pursue it? Do you know?
I don't think they pursued it. No. But this was this Gary Oliva fellow that's been in the news uh, lately,
Yeah.
no, year. Uh, I don't know that his DNA matched, which is always the first hurdle that needed to be overcome.
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, it didn't match.
Right.
So, even though they're very these circumstantial ones are very interesting. I got one the other day from a a retired detective, and it was a very interesting lead. I gave it to when we met with the police. I gave it to him. I said, "This is an interesting lead."
Do you think that the killer is still alive?
Well, in theory, he should be. The FBI profile thought the guy was probably 20s to 30 kind of age range, young guy, so he hasn't aged out yet. Um, we can only assume he's still out there.
When the day comes that they get this guy and announce him, that will be the biggest, assuming it's a guy. Well, yeah, the male DNA. That will be just be so big. And
Yeah.
are you confident that'll happen in your lifetime?
If the police will use the technology that's available to them, yes, I am. If they don't, no. It's
I'm
Lou Smith, he said, if this case solely remains in the Boulder police hands, it'll never be solved. Meaning that if they don't reach out, use help and technology that's available, it's dead in the water.
I'm sure you have gone through every scenario in your mind about what happened. Do you have one though that you think probably happened as far as how this guy may have known your daughter, known your home, entered the house?
Well, what I believe is that he came into the house while we were out for dinner with the kids, waited until we went to bed, and then struck. This same scenario happened about 9 months later. Uh, Little girl that was in the same dance class as JonBenét lived a few blocks away from us. Her parents had gone out for dinner, came home, set the burglar alarm, and went to bed. And her mother heard a noise in her daughter's bedroom, got up, and there was a man standing over her daughter's bed. And he fled, got out, got away. he had come in the house, obviously, when they were out for dinner, because when they got home, they set the burglar alarm. So he couldn't have got in after they got home. I think that's exactly what happened in our case. We didn't have a burglar alarm set anyway. The FBI profile that John Douglas developed was that this person, he said, this is someone who's either very angry at you, John, or very jealous of you. This isn't about JonBenét. This was intended to hurt you. And that was a tough pill to swallow. And I said, well, I can't imagine I could have made anybody angry like that. I mean, we had a lot of employees in Boulder, and we had some that were let go. I'm sure that since I was head of the company, I would get probably the blame. But he said, you may not even know him. You may not know him. But they, in their mind,
You're responsible.
they're, yeah.
You make an interesting point about, these suspects and ultimate perpetrators coming out of left field. We had one here in Idaho Falls, Angie Dodge, who was murdered, and everybody thought it was Christopher Tapp. Turns out it was a guy that lived across the street named Brian Drips who did it and moved away. And decades later, they found him in another part of Idaho through genetic DNA.
Wow.
Cigarette, but thrown out the window. So you never know when that break could be, but you're right. The police have to pursue it. And it did take a change in police leadership in Idaho Falls to get that going again.
Interesting. Well, nothing would have happened in Boulder had we not had a change of leadership. The chief of police that's currently in office was brought in from the outside, which was very significant. You can't promote from a dysfunctional organization and hope that it changes. They didn't. They brought him in from the outside, and he had a lot of good experience, and it seems like a very solid guy. I've been impressed with him, and I met his chief of detectives, who's new. Impressed with him. His director of operations was in our meeting. Seemed like a very solid guy. So, totally different set of characters are now running the show, and that had to happen before anything would happen in our case.
How are you and your son and your family doing today, nearly 30 years later?
Well, we're doing fine. I mean, we're sadly, I've learned that when there's a loss of a child, either through an accident or in our case, a murder, parents end up getting divorced. 80% of the time it ends in divorce. And it's, I think, for two reasons. One is either each parent is so self-absorbed with their loss that they give up on the relationship at the time when that relationship now is really important to support each other. And the other reason, I think, potentially is that there's a blame game. Oh, you shouldn't have let Johnny have the car keys. I told you that was a bad idea, and so most of the time marriages end up in divorce after the loss of a child. For us, we really recognize that our living children, we had three, needed us now more than ever to be strong and to be they're devastated and crushed and hurt deeply as well. And so that really got us going as parents to say, okay, we used to call them pity parties. We both get down and we say, let's not have a pity party here. Let's get up and go. And that just helped us to keep the focus on our living children and what they needed now more than ever from us as parents. So that helped us get our life back together as best we could. Although I've said, the killer took away my ability, my desire to live for a while. I was so crushed that death would have been a gift, and the pain was so deep. The police took away my ability to live because of their accusations. And, basically their strategy to solve the case back then was, okay, we know it's the parents, they were in the house. We just don't know which one. Let's bring pressure on both of them through false information we'll give to the media. They'll go with it. And accusations, veiled accusations that, yeah, we know who did this. We just need a little time to figure it out. That'll bring pressure on both parents. The innocent one will turn the guilty one in. Case will be solved. That was told to us by the DA a couple of years later that was the strategy to solve the case
Hmm.
by the police. And so all this misleading information was out there. Oh, there's no killer running around Boulder. Don't worry about it, folks. The police purposely put that out there to bring pressure on us, and the media went crazy with it. It sort of filled a vacuum, I guess, at the time. O.J. Simpson trial I just ended. They had all this bandwidth of true crime, and there was nothing to talk about till the Ramseys came along. So
Yeah.
media ran with it, with the false information that was put out, and there was a lot of it. John flew his private jet back to Atlanta for JonBenét's funeral. How could a grieving father do that? I didn't have a jet. Fundamental number one problem. So just stuff like that just got put out there that was false, but skewed public opinion and the media against us.
And you were saying that originated with the police.
Yeah, that was their strategy to solve the case. That was intentionally done by the police, and that made it very difficult for us to carry on with our lives. Obviously, I lost my job. We pretty much burned through our life savings defending ourselves from the police, and so not only did we have the grief to deal with, but we had other obstacles as well to get our life somewhat back on track.
You mentioned the media. I want to ask about that because this was 1996, before internet, before podcasts, before YouTube. I cannot imagine today, if this happened, the amount of attention that it would get. But even back in the day of 96, it was huge. Like you said, you're on the cover of tabloids.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that? I'm sure that your view of the media has changed so much over the years. Do you trust any of them? I mean, what was your strategy?
Well, I looked at the media as a tool, a communication tool, and our attorneys wouldn't let us talk to anybody. They didn't even want us to talk to the police. They said, "Look, as a defense attorney, if the police thinks our client's guilty, we don't talk to him. That's rule number one for a defense attorney." And we're like, "No, that doesn't make any sense." So we talked to the police a fair amount, and despite our attorney's objection, but they would not let us talk to the media, nor would they. They said, "Look, we don't practice law in front of a camera." And so being tried in the court of public opinion, which we were, we couldn't respond per their request and didn't really want to. And they wouldn't respond because they said, "We don't know how to do that. We practice law in front of a judge, not in front of a camera."
Right.
And so when we did finally, they begrudgingly said, "Okay, go ahead and hire Lynn Wood," who is an attorney that would go after the media. Most attorneys will not go after the media because they get blacklisted by the whole industry. Lynn didn't care. And anyway, so Lynn took our case and started filing some lawsuits, mostly against the tabloids. And and Lynn said in the beginning, she said, "I could keep a law school busy with all the potential cases out there."
Mm,
And then he said, "I don't even know where to start."
right. But you ultimately did do interviews. Was it Lynn that encouraged you to do them, like go on TV and talk, or?
Well, the only interview we did early on, the first one we did was with Barbara Walters.
Okay.
And that was, as I remember, that was the only interview we did.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Did
Did you hold a news conference or anything, like a news?
Yeah, we had a press conference. I know when Lynn announced his team that was going to go aggressive after the media. I remember that, widely attended by the media. Where we are today, though, with the media, I think they've generally figured out they were lied to by the police, that they were wrong, and they're largely supportive, is my gut feel.
Yeah.
Uh, and they're anxious to right the wrong that was done to us.
Yeah.
Uh, is kind of how I read it, and I'm grateful. And I've done a lot of interviews lately to, and I've done them off and on, over the years to keep pressure on the police. Period. That's the only reason. I'm not trying to vindicate myself, or I'm not looking for a media career.
Right.
I want to keep pressure on the police. Boys, this is not going away. We're going to be your worst enemy until you do your damn job.
Yeah. I know a few years ago when we met at CrimeCon, your session was packed. You couldn't get a seat. I mean, people wanted to come and hear from you. Is that one of the reasons you decided to speak there?
Well, when that first time we went to CrimeCon, I didn't know even what it was, and we were invited by Paula Woodward, who had written a book on our case. She'd followed the case. She was an investigative journalist that followed the case from the beginning.
That's right.
Very, very knowledgeable on the case, what happened over the period of time. And she'd written a book, and they asked her to come speak, and would I come as well? And so, well, sure, I could do that. Had no idea what I was agreeing to, and had this wonderful audience that were interested in our case, and it was really energizing for me because I'd been out there pretty much banging on the police single-handedly for years, and you get weary and discouraged. And man, we got here's 5,000 people that are helping and interested and want to see this corrected, and it really energized me to get going again. So
Yeah.
it was a blessing to me to have that attention. And for some reason, and I'm grateful because I don't want my daughter's case to go away and end up in a dusty file cabinet in the police department. It has worldwide attention.
Yep.
And I don't know why our case has been singled out of the 1,000 or so murders a year we have every year in this country of children. Why it's singled out, and those children are forgotten about, and that's sad. As a country, one of the things I got excited about, okay, how do you make something good come out of this that's lasting? And I got on a self directed mission of the murder of a child ought to be a federal offense. We can't leave it up to Barney Fife in Mayberry if the murder happens in Mayberry. And if he's got such a big ego and arrogant that he won't accept help, that case will never be solved. As a society, we need to protect our children and respond with the full might of our country when one of them is harmed. So I wanted to make the murder of a child 12 and under a federal offense. Well, it turns out that's not easy to do. I talked to a Department of Justice person, and he said that'd be a really tough law to get enacted because it crosses state boundaries in their authorities. And murder is a state crime. It's crazy. I didn't know that. Most people don't know that.
Yeah. I think most people don't understand the whole that there's jurisdictions in the police
No.
versus sheriffs. It's you call 911, someone comes to help, and it is what it is.
That's right. No, it's a real primitive system we have.
Yeah.
There's no oversight or coordinating organization. That you have the FBI, they've got to be asked to help. If they don't get asked, they can't come in with all their resources
Yeah.
to Boulder, Colorado.
Well, it was encouraging, as you said. The new Boulder police chief posted a video on Facebook, didn't he, talking
Yeah.
about this case.
Mhm.
So, they're thinking about it. They met with you. You're doing interviews like this to keep the word out there, and hopefully it does something, shakes something open.
Yeah, that's our hope. And I've told him, look, I believe that this technology that's now available and being widely used by good police departments to solve old cold cases, if that's employed, I think there's a very high probability we can get an answer. If you do that and try and we come up empty-handed, hey, thanks for trying. You did everything that could be done.
Right.
And that'll be what I say. If you don't try, I'm going to keep the pressure on. And it a journalist told me, I don't know, within the last year, she overheard an older police person say, "Well, we're just waiting for John Ramsey to die," and that
Mm.
sadly is the old culture.
Mm.
Um, and but I feel pretty good. I'm not going anywhere.
You look good. You look young. So
Thanks.
let's say that they get this guy in the next year
Mhm.
and he's arrested, he's charged, found guilty, pleads guilty, whatever. What do you say to him? What would you say to him now?
I don't know. I don't know. Uh, Early in this event, you put me in the same room with him, he wouldn't come out alive. I know that. I was so much rage, um, and that wouldn't have been right, but that's how I felt. And then I got to the point of, okay, how do you deal with forgiveness as we're told to deal with forgiveness um, uh, as a Christian? And that was a tough one to wrestle down. It took me several years to figure out how you deal with that. And forgiveness is a gift you give yourself to release that rage and anger and desire for revenge. You got to move on. Doesn't mean you're absolved from justice, but I release that anchor and I'm moving on. Um, I don't know. When this John Mark Carr was arrested, it was one of the fairly interesting leads that came up to our investigators, um, found in Bangkok through some pretty amazing detective work by the DA and not the police, but the other authorities. Found the guy I don't know, John Mark Carr. He found him in Bangkok anyway. Had
He said he did it, didn't he?
yeah, yeah, and they, long story short, they brought him back to the U.S. and I wasn't. I was skeptical because until the DNA matched, we didn't have anything. And it also made me realize it's going to be very difficult to deal with the trial and what actually happened and what you actually did to my daughter. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a year, 2 year process probably. So it's sort of sobering in a way. It wasn't like, we got the guy. Let's go celebrate. No, it's going to be hard.
A whole new phase. A whole
Oh,
new phase. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
And
So,
then when, assuming he's found guilty, uh, does Colorado have the death penalty?
uh, I don't know. But our attorneys told us years ago, they said, look, when they get to this guy, they're going to ask you as parents, do you want us to go after the death penalty or life in prison? And they said, it won't matter. This fellow will not survive 2 weeks in prison
Hmm.
because what he did is so far beneath the lowest of the low standards of any criminal. He won't live. Don't, it's not going to be an issue. So,
Right. They're gonna have to put him in isolation.
absolutely.
Well, John, what do you want the world to know? Anything else? Anything else we didn't touch on?
Well, um, I've told, one of my, um, I guess realization, we were naive. We thought we lived in this la la land, Boulder, Colorado, flowers and peace symbols and, no bad people there. And you just got to be realistic about life. We live in a tough neighborhood, and don't be negligent in protecting your children, or negligence, maybe not the right word, but don't be careless. Make sure your home is secure. Uh, there are bad people everywhere, and don't be paranoid. There's a lot of good people. We had an amazing number of good people came to our aid. People asked me early on, "What's it like to be out in public?" I said, "Oh, it's wonderful. People are." I had it happen today. I was buying a new pair of jeans, and this lady said, "Did I see you on television?" I said, "Well, quite possibly." And said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. What's been done to you and what's happened?" And that happened all the time from the very beginning.
Mm.
People really uplifted us. Just people we didn't know.
Yeah.
And there's lots of good people in the world too, but there are some bad ones. And just don't be foolish. Protect your children.
Have you had anybody ever come up to you and be like, "I know you did it"?
Oh, I got a letter. We get probably, I don't know, I could probably count on one set of hands the number of nasty letters we've gotten. I got one early on about, it was very, "I know you did it. If you ever come to New York, I'm going to find you and I'm going to get you." And I wrote him back, said, "Congratulations, you've written the most hateful letter I've gotten so far."
You did write him back though.
Yeah.
Wow. But you said on one hand you can count the number
No,
of
I say both hands. Sorry.
both hands. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
So not a
not
lot.
bad considering it's been 30 years.
Yeah. No, most of the letters we got have gotten, and we got lots of them, are, "I think I know who did this. Here's why I think that. Here's the information. Please call me." That,
Hmm.
and we follow up on them, and regretfully, I mean, the intentions are good, but regretfully, they're not. They don't fit.
Right. Right.
I got one the other day that did look very interesting, and it was written by a former retired police detective, and I forwarded that on to the police and said, "This looks very interesting."
Hmm.
So, but again, it's going to be solved by DNA, is my conviction.
Right.
No
Well,
doubt.
I hope the next time I see you, it's been solved or that there are
Well,
some advances.
yeah, thanks. Well, I appreciate your interest in the case, and
Yeah.
it if we just get the police to, and then maybe they're doing it now with new leadership. I'm going to give them some time and just see what happens.
What happens? Right.
Uh, and I without the change of leadership and the getting rid of the old school detectives or so-called detectives, nothing would happen.
Yeah.
But
John, thank you.
You're welcome, Nate.
Good
Thanks.
to see you. This is one of those cases that tomorrow they could say, "We have our suspect." Or in 10 years, they could say, "We have our suspect." I mean, you just never know with DNA, with technology the way it is. And wouldn't it be something if we finally get this case closed? And whoever the perpetrator is, if it's determined if to do a crime this horrific, were other people victims of this same criminal? Or was this a one-time thing? Anyway, my thanks to John Ramsey for speaking. You can tell he, is passionate about this still and wants to get this case solved, and we hope that for him as well. You can stay up to date on my reporting, everything that's happening. Here's how you can find me. I'm on the Facebook. Follow me there. I probably post the most updates there. I'm also on Instagram, YouTube, X. As I mentioned, next week, another Courtroom Insider will be back. In the coming weeks, we'll have Marsha Clark, and then we'll be in Daybell mode, Lori Vallow mode for her trial. Whether it lasts a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I don't think it'll be longer than 3 weeks. The prosecutor said a couple of weeks. But basically, we'll start doing Courtroom Insiders probably the last week of March, do some, catch-up sessions, and we'll be live taking your questions. Peggy, our moderator, will be on top of it. and it should be really interesting. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great